Well, hey, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Full Frontal Living podcast. And before we dive into the episode, which is called How to Powerfully Manage Stress, Anxiety, and ADHD with Somatic Practitioner Melina McConnell, um, I wanted you to know that this episode is packed full of so much more. I cannot say enough about Melina's work with me over the past year. And honestly, she has been a part of my transformation over the past decade, even when I wasn't working with her. And I'm going to share more about that in the episode. But I really wanted to do this episode justice by letting you know just how much of an expert Melina is in her field. And she's going to talk about this in the actual episode as well. But Melina believes that trauma steals our sense of safety, curiosity, competence, and sense of belonging, leaving you with symptoms of nervous system dysregulation and other often painful body manifestations. So if you have chronic pain happening in your body, you're going to want to listen to this episode. She's also a firm believer that we are neatly designed to heal, which I also believe that we are actually put on this planet to heal and transform. We come here with lessons to learn and we need to work through them. But we've become so radically disconnected from our bodies. And this is why I love Melina, because she really takes a mind-body approach that is so essential in healing the effects of the human experience. You cannot think your way through transformation. So although having conversations, uprooting beliefs, this has been such a tremendous amount of my work and my own personal journey over, more than a decade now. I cannot not work on the physical element of healing because so much is stored in our tissues. So Melina is a somatic trauma therapist. She's IFS informed counselor, which is internal family systems. If you are unfamiliar with it, feel free to Google. And she supports her clients through the intersection between neuroscience, trauma, and attachment from what she calls psychoneurobiological approach. She helps her clients address the underlying causes of these symptoms through somatic practices and somatic IFS work, encouraging the movement of stuck survival energies, renegotiating boundaries, and repairing attunement ruptures from early life, moving clients towards wholeness and health. Melina has advanced training in therapeutic touch, which includes this as a regular part of her practice. And I have the privilege of working with her in person and having her hands physically on my body. And I can attest to the amount of energy that I have had stored in my body and what it's changing for me as it releases, which I'll share more with you as you dive into the episode. So she maintains a private practice in Vancouver, BC, which is where I live. So unfortunately, unless you are in the Lower Mainland, you won't have the honor of working with her in person. However, she is expanding her work online, and we will put all of the information about how you can connect with Melina in the show notes, so make sure you check that out. She assists individuals in the areas of trauma, developmental trauma, shock trauma, CPTSD, and PTSD, human development and attachment, anxiety, depression, chronic pain, and the physical and emotional effects of chronic trauma, stress, and addictions. So without further ado, enjoy this episode. It is a information packed episode. It's one of my longer episodes, but I promise you it's going to be worth every moment you listen. And again, don't forget to check out the show notes so you can connect with Melina if her message speaks to you and begin your own journey into exploring somatic therapies and somatic healing to free yourself of things like ADHD, chronic pain, stress, and anxiety. Well, hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Full Frontal Living podcast. And I have a really special guest on today. Her name is Melina McConnell. I said that right, correct? And I always just call you Melina. When I have to call people by their last names, I'm always like, who, what?
Yeah, who's that?
Who is that? Anyways, as usual, this is going to be just a really open dialogue. But I'm excited to introduce Melina to you because Melina first came into my life, probably about 12 years ago now, when my hubby at the time went into addiction recovery. And I realized that I needed to take responsibility for my own role in the relationship. So it wasn't about fixing him, although at first I thought it was about fixing him. And I had, what was my problem? But Melina was one of my first therapists and counselors, and she really had a profound impact in my life. She said some of the things to me that needed to be said, even though I would often leave those therapy sessions being like, what just happened here? They were hard hitting, but they needed to be hard hitting because they needed to disrupt what was going on in me. Now, you know, a lot of things unfolded for me in 2023, and I am a big believer in seeking out the people who have been in your corner through your journey. So I always go back to coaches and therapists because there's something to be said, for me at least, around the safety that is found in those relationships you've already cultivated. So when things unfolded in 2023, Melina was one of the first people that I reached out to, which is why I'm excited to introduce you to her today, because she's made a transition from being an addictions counselor therapist into doing somatic work. And somatic work has really been profound in my own healing over the past year, and humbling. Probably some of the most humbling work that I've ever done. And I've done a lot of work on myself. So, Melina, before I continue to gush about you, I would love for you to properly introduce yourself to my community, because I know I'm doing all your credentials, which are extensive, a disservice. So introduce yourself, and then I would love for you to talk about what caused you to make that transition from being in the addiction therapy counseling area into somatic work, and why that was so important to you.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thanks for having me here today as well. So I've been in the realm of therapy counseling for just over 21 years now. And as you know, I started in addictions and trauma. And over the years, about 12, 13 years in, I was realizing different themes that kept coming up with folks that I was working with. Um, a lot of the patterns would change for periods of time, and then people would go back to compulsive behaviors of some kind, never really understanding at that time the underpinning that was actually happening. So we were treating the addictions, but not really treating what, or supporting people to understand better why they kept choosing or not choosing the coping strategies that they were. So I was starting to put it out to my community and asking if anyone knew any kind of work that could support the trauma that I was seeing over and over and over. So I kind of put my feelers out there, and I found out at that time about somatic experiencing. So I think I mentioned this to you before, I had gone to a weekend workshop intro session. And about an hour in, I was like, that's the thing. That's exactly what I've been looking for. Not really understanding even what I was looking for at the time. And so I went home and I said to my husband, yeah, I know it's another 3-year program, but I'm gonna do it. And literally signed up, I think, that Monday. I was just very, very intrigued and interested to learn more about the body, learn more about what was happening with traumatic stress. And so I did, and I explored that 3-year program. And then upon graduating, one of the faculty said, okay, congratulations, you've graduated kindergarten. And I was like, what on earth is he talking about? But it was true. It really opened up the doors to more and more sort of uncharted territory, having been that I had started off as a talk therapist and then moving into the realm of somatic work. There was a huge learning curve for me to understand physiology, to understand what was happening in the body. And so I dove in and have been continuously doing trainings and advanced work over the last decade.
It's amazing because I would, having known you for so many years, I think there's a lot of similarities between us and a lot of differences too, right? But I would kind of coin you more of like the analytical left brain thinker. Like, you're a very critical thinker, got a lot of education behind you, but somatic work actually forces you to be in that right brain mind body connection, and not always letting the brain override, or the thinking part, because that a lot of talk therapy is about trying to think our way through it. And I'm
Mhm.
not poo-pooing on talk therapy or coaching or anything like that, because I think it's also powerful questions create powerful shifts. But it's recognizing that there's so much more wisdom held in the body that we can't think our way through, which,
Yeah.
that's what becomes so humbling. So I would love for you, for the listeners, to define how you classify trauma, because I know for many of the men and women that I work with, one of the questions that I ask on my intake form, and I find this fascinating, is, did you have a safe and stable environment growing up? To which almost all of them answer yes. And
Mhm.
then I ask them if there was any type of addiction in their family, whether it was drinking, drugs, shopping, social media, eating disorders,
Yeah.
and almost all of them say yes. And you and I both know that the two they don't cohabitate without a certain amount of trauma. Yet we've so normalized these environments. So I would love for you to kind of define trauma in a way that people can understand, and how that impacts why we get into addictions. But even knowing addictions go way beyond like drinking and drugs, it can be people pleasing and being overly controlling, etc. That was a massive question. So
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, no problem. So, there we go. Trauma can be defined as something that happens to us or something that doesn't happen to us
mm,
that essentially overwhelms the nervous system and has a threatening component to it. So, unlike being overwhelmed, trauma has the component of threatening our well being, either physically or emotionally. So, not all things that are overwhelming are traumatic.
mm,
So, there's a difference also between shock trauma and early childhood and developmental trauma. So, maybe I'll start with the first one. Developmental trauma generally happens in our early stages of life or prior to inception, even. So, in utero, we can carry traumatic stress from our ancestors, from our mom, through what's called epigenetics. So I won't go too much into that whole sciencey thing around it, but we can also have experiences after birth, and depending on the environment. So it's like nurture nature. The nurturing and the environment have a big factor in how our systems metabolize stress. So, a growing little one is more susceptible to things that are overwhelming or traumatic than somebody who hasn't had a lot of adversity, from the get go, and then having something overwhelming or traumatic happening later in life. So, let's say baby's born and needs to have medical procedures. That child being taken away from their primary caregivers disrupts the bonding and attachment that they would have otherwise. That creates distress for a little one. So, when we experience something traumatic when we're little or in utero, it literally affects us at the fluid system and cellular system in the body. That then puts a marker into the system that will potentially influence other experiences that come afterward.
so
So
profound. Keep going.
yeah, it's okay. So developmental trauma is usually, like I was saying, early days until 3, 4 years old. Then we move into early trauma, early childhood trauma. So again, early childhood trauma could be up until our brains are fully developed, 25 years old. So then different experiences will affect the developing brain and nervous system during our developmental years. And then if we have shock trauma on top of that kind of platform, it's going to be much more disruptive than, like I was saying, somebody who has, a fairly secure start to life, not a lot of disruption, not a lot of stress on the system. Their ability to have resiliency through something that is shocking to the nervous system will be easier, so to speak, to recover from.
Yeah, so I was a 3-time winner. I think I probably had all 3. So we have to make,
Yes.
because trauma can be a very heavy thing, and I can go deep, as you know. And I think we need to, what I'm getting from this conversation and what I want other people to recognize is that pretty much everybody has some level of trauma in their life. And I think I also just want to say for the parents, like if your child was taken from you when it's a baby, that created trauma for you too. And you also can't hang on to the fact that your child probably experienced trauma. Like everybody is going to have their own journey.
Well, part of that is also working with our mum parts around guilt. So even
Yes,
though something could be a medical procedure where it's life saving, will still potentially have an impact on
correct.
the parent and potentially on the child. Having this kind of understanding and awareness can be helpful, for people to be able to move through their own emotions and feeling toward the helplessness of, having a child being taken away for something, even like I said, even if it's life
Yeah.
saving. Hmm.
So much of the somatic work is, at least it has been for me, is learning an even deeper level of self-compassion and grace
Mm-hmm.
and self-love. And one of the things that you said to me, and you said here again, that was so powerful for me was, Lisa, trauma isn't always something that happens to you. Because for the most
Right.
part, I had a normal childhood, right? I've got great parents. They did the best they could. This isn't about throwing my parents under the bus and blame them, because I truly believe in personal responsibility and everything happening the way that is meant to happen for our journeys. That just brings me peace in my life. But when you said to me, trauma isn't always something that happens to you, it can be something that doesn't happen to you. I was like, whoa, that just absolutely took my breath away, because I'd never thought of trauma in that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, often when we aren't nurtured, when we aren't seen for who we are, when we aren't able to express authentically, is extremely distressing for, again, a developing, growing brain and nervous system. And so part of what happens is we shut that part of ourselves off. And, we can move right into nervous system stuff here
Yeah,
if
that
you
would be
want.
great.
If we aren't able to be heard and understood and taken care of and held and nurtured and touched in a healthy way, touch is one of the first senses that we learn as little ones. So when we're met and there's eye to eye contact and there's, singing and humming and all of those really lovely things, is really supportive of co-regulation. When there's a nervous system and, a regulated nervous system helping to support the baby's nervous system to regulate, even if it's not perfect. I'm a parent too. It doesn't have to be 100% of the time. So I'm certainly not here to be judging anyone's parents, but we know a lot more now than we did, when I was growing up, even around attachment theory. Well, attachment theory has been around for a long time, but thanks to the internet, we have a lot more accessible knowledge and data available. And when we get that kind of healthy other, when there is the right brain to right brain connection happening, then that is part of our nonverbal communication. Up until language, that's how we're interpreting our experience of what's coming back to us. So if what's coming back, we're met with blank stares, not smiling faces, or there's nobody there, and we're, left for longer periods of time than what is actually healthy, the child will be in distress. And as a little one, we aren't able to fight or flee. So the only other survival energy available is to freeze. And we don't interpret mom and dad being busy and unavailable in any way about them. We internalize that and say, okay, well, I must be unlovable then. There must be something wrong with me, or people would be coming to help me. Little ones don't have the access yet to the prefrontal cortex to rationalize why somebody isn't attending to us sooner. So that lack of attunement from when we're little is what you're speaking about, is the not getting. And that is and can be part of developmental trauma, the lack of attunement.
It's so interesting because I talk a lot about beliefs and stories, and so many of us are walking around unconscious to the fact that, a 5-year-old child is making decisions for us on the daily because we brought in those stories and beliefs when we didn't have that filter to go, well, of course my mom loves me. She's just busy with stuff. And it creates that story of I'm not good enough or I'm not lovable. And those stories are still playing out in our 40s and 50s. And what I find with my generation, and we had talked about this a little bit as I've been, stirring on all the things in my past, because that's what I do. Gen X, man, we were the kids that were thrown outside, come home when the street lights come on. Our
Yeah.
parents would quite often leave us, not because they didn't love us. And as I was thinking about the age of my parents, which I've never really put this together, my parents were babies having babies.
Mm-hmm.
So when I think about co-regulating, right, like being able to hold that safe space for my kids, and I had my kids in my late 20s, I was not emotionally developed enough to co-regulate with them, let alone in like a baby having a baby. And this whole idea of co-regulation was also so really new for me, not even recognizing that the people that we surround ourselves with are either supporting our nervous system or throwing us into more emotional chaos that we might even not be totally conscious of.
Yeah. So the good news is the data says 30% of the time. So 30% of the time we need to get it more right than not in order to help our children to feel more secure and to feel that there is somebody there. So again, it's feeling, right? So it's the ability for them to actually internalize that somebody is there. So our felt sense is different than our cognitive understanding and knowing. So it's
Fascinating.
not about the thinking about it only. That's where, coming back to your comment about when we're little and then those patterns carry us through into adulthood, because we don't, and a lot of us back then didn't understand, we didn't have access to this information. And so now knowing, it's like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense that partnering up with somebody who might feed into like an unhealthy attachment pattern. If we grew up in an environment where there was more of an avoidant tendency, parents that weren't around, not because they didn't love us, but they maybe didn't realize how important it was to get tucked in at night and saying to when we were little and things like that. Again, it wasn't malicious, but just not understanding that emotionally neglecting children has a long-term impact.
Right.
So later, then we may gravitate toward a partner who emulates mom or dad, that familiarity in terms of how we're being treated, and our own maladaptive behaviors then feeds into our potential romantic other relationships. So we then look at our partners like family or spouses where they're not, right? Partners are essentially, and I mentioned to you this a while ago, partners and romantic relationships are essentially strangers that we're constantly getting to know. But we treat people as though they're family, that they should know, but we don't have that same biological connection. And so we have to, learn about ourselves, our own patterns, how our nervous system reacts to stress, and then hopefully supporting our partners to do the same for them, and for them to get to know themselves as a way to also support the coming together, so that we are working in a two-system approach, not just independently in a relationship. We want to eventually work toward interdependency. So you were
Yeah.
mentioning earlier about codependency,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that's kind of like, I need you to do this for me so I can be okay. So I see that as a defensive accommodation. right? We're trying to accommodate our internal defenses because we cannot essentially regulate ourselves. But if we didn't get that from the beginning, the inability to self-soothe becomes that much greater. So then we need these external other things as a way to help support us to feel regulated. So that's like a faux regulation, right? So we are
Right.
in that sort of faux window of tolerance. If I'm stressed out and I'm on my own and I don't have anybody, I'm going to, of course, look for things to help me to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to feel cared for. And sometimes that's where we get into more of the addiction piece, is that we look for things until, we'll look for one thing and it doesn't work. We'll look for another thing. And then all of a sudden, oh, here's alcohol or pot or some drugs or a relationship. And it's like, bang, now I have the thing that helps me to feel safe, but it's a faux safety. It's not from myself to myself, comforting and taking care of my internal world. So that sometimes will look like what's called external locus of control. That's often what I see in very high functioning people who are like very work driven or very academic. Somewhere along the line, there was an over focus potentially of something that helped the person to be motivated, to feel connected, to have less fear of scarcity, whatever it might be. It's like, that's the thing I'm going to do. I'm going to be super academic and get the job, and then I can leave home, and then I can find this partner, and then I'll feel
Then
safe
I'll
and
feel
to
better.
be who I am. Exactly.
Yeah, it's that yeah, looking for other people, places, and things to make you feel better, putting that responsibility outside of yourself instead of inside of ourselves. And, in terms of high achievement and all those things that I see in the women that I work with, so often they've been rewarded for those maladaptive
Right.
behaviors. And in all fairness, this mind-body connection is still kind of, the way I see it is it's still in its infancy. When I think back to, I was going to say 41, and I'm like, wow, you just shaved like 10 years off your life there, Lisa. 51. Back when I was growing up, there was no talk about emotional fluency. It was just like, suck it up, buttercup. Like we didn't talk about feelings. And most of the women in my generation, we learned to disregard our feelings, and we learned to disregard that mind-body connection because our feelings were invalidated anyways. So
Yeah.
what's the point in having them? But if you're going to tell me like I'm awesome and I'm a good girl because I've ticked these boxes and I'm showing up the way you think I should show up, then of
Mhm.
course we're going to start to chase that. And, I came to work with you because this had shown up in my relationship again in a way that I was completely blind to until, things went sideways. But that I believe that we are all going to have these moments in our lives where we have an opportunity where we're invited into this deeper work. You don't have to accept the invitation. Probably lead a challenging life if you don't, but everybody gets to choose. Anybody who's listening to this is listening because they want to do this work. But I wanted to talk a little bit more about this functional freeze. And I actually really appreciated you saying that we only have to get it right about 30% of the time, because I feel like that is a bar that pretty much everybody listening can reach for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I think 30% is pretty good. I can do that. But functional freeze, the reason I wanted to talk about this and I wanted to share this experience with my listeners because it was so, I remember being on your table. So when I work with Melina, she's like hands-on, and I have the privilege of being able to work with you locally. Um, and you had me do this exercise, and I'm lying there in my head trying to figure out what you're doing, because that's often what I'm trying to do is like, what are we actually doing here, because it is such subtle work. And you had me put my arms in the air and then drop them by my side, and you had me put my legs in the air and drop me by my side, and then you asked me how I was feeling, and I said I'm like tingly all over. So you're like, cool. You didn't say cool, that's my word. Let's get up. And then you
Yeah.
said, we're going to do jumping jacks now. And I was
Mhm.
like, I'm thinking in my head, this is amazing. She's teaching me how to move this energy out of my body. And then you told me to stop. And I just remember I could not stop the tears and the emotions from coming through me. And then what came up behind it so powerfully that it just about took me out was the shame of being, and I consider myself pretty, like, I'm comfortably uncomfortable with vulnerability, but that was like next level because here I am bawling my eyes out in front of you. And I remember I couldn't even make contact with you because the amount of shame that was there, and I was present to it. I wasn't oblivious to what was going on. And at the same time, I couldn't override it. I couldn't force the tears down. And I remember you saying to me, when you're ready, I need you to look at me. And like holding that really firm space around, you need to look at me, because it was about that co-regulation and teaching me that I could be with this energy and be with this emotion at a heightened level. And it was part of, if I understand correctly, trying to break that functional freeze in me. Am I totally off base, or am I in
So
line?
yes, and there's a little bit
There's
more.
more. Okay.
Yeah. So yes, so the moving the energy through the body was as a way to interrupt you going into further freeze. So to live consciously, we need to have access to our bodies. So this was an opportunity to say, okay, so I'm seeing that you're in a freeze response in the moment. Let's get the energy moving. When the shame comes up, as a way to normalize the shame response, is to kind of to say it. It's like, okay, and I've mentioned this before. It's kind of like, yeah, shame's in the room. Are you noticing? Like it's, yeah. So there's some shame here. We're going to just acknowledge that it's happening, and you're not alone. When you feel ready, if it's okay to try to make eye contact with me, is about recognizing that you're not alone.
Mm.
To take in another nervous system and for somebody else to witness you in those feelings and in that state was a different experience. So we're having a corrective experience of feeling this deep shame, and can you sense me here with you, even just a little bit, as much as you can take in?
Yeah. Yeah, it was a really powerful moment of choosing to not abandon myself, even though part of me wanted to like flee the building,
Of course,
and
yeah.
allowing myself to be supported in an even deeper way than I ever had been
Mhm.
before. And, what's been so challenging for me with this work is somebody who, I've done a lot of work on myself, which, I'm highly committed to my own growth. And
Mhm.
I have unraveled, like I can look back now and really see how much of this freeze I've been in, even though it had softened and unraveled when this kind of, shock trauma happened, how quickly my body went back into that state. But to have so much more of awareness while at the same time being completely clueless to the fact that my body was in this holding pattern, that was really hard for me, because being so kinesthetic, I always want to feel like I know what's going on with my body. And it was so humbling to feel like, wow, I have no idea what's going on with my body.
Yeah. So if something happens that keeps us in unconscious, or if we're not taught to be embodied, then we generally don't know to go there.
Mm,
So what I'm saying is that if something happens to us, that connecting to our body is too overwhelming, we will cut off our sensory. We will cut off the ability to go inside. Or if we're not taught about feelings and the connection between feelings and our sensations, etc., then we don't know that that's a thing we can do. So traumatic stress or trauma will also steal essentially like the sense of our self. It'll steal the sense of safety, of curiosity, of our internal competency, our creativity. And so then we become in our heads, like you were saying earlier about left brainy. So that's something that I've known about myself. I was actually very right brain, but I
mm,
didn't really know how to do that, as it wasn't as easily accessible as my left brain until then I learned. And I was like, oh my gosh, okay, so I have known this about myself. I've always had very strong intuition, but I didn't know that it was okay to access that. I thought that like something was wrong if I were to do that, my feelings would have been too much, that I was too sensitive, etc. Now knowing that isn't necessarily the case, that there's beauty in being sensitive and beauty in acknowledging those parts of myself, and also about boundaries, that even though I can have empathy and compassion, I can't, feel everybody's distress, because it would be too much for my system.
Overwhelming.
And that would be extremely traumatic to take on, more than what I can in a healthy way to be helpful. So what ends up happening when we are disconnected, the nervous system behind the scenes is responding to our experiences, whether we have conscious awareness to it or not.
Okay. So what
So,
does that look like?
yeah.
Talk everybody through what's actually going on um, in our nervous system, and then maybe we can go into some signs and symptoms that they might be able to identify with that will show them, oh, I'm in my head, I'm not in my body, and I'm running kind of this like nervous system trauma response. I think that would be
Yeah.
helpful.
Okay. So it can start with having a sense of what are the things that we're doing habitually that may not always be helpful. So let's
Like
say
overthinking.
overthinking something. Let's say we're not sleeping well. Let's say that we feel anxious or stressed or overworked or hurried.
Okay.
These would be signs that our nervous system would likely be in a high arousal state. So in sympathetic activation, where the gas pedal's on. We're hurried, we can't get things done, we feel very overwhelmed. It's affecting maybe our parenting, we feel short-tempered, we feel agitated, those types of feelings
It
in.
also infects our cognitive ability
Mhm,
as well,
right.
right? Like we can't.
Yeah. We're not
Okay.
thinking clearly. We might have what I call squirrely brain. Often people think they have ADD or ADHD,
Yeah.
and sometimes it's that we are not regulated. So if we feel very dysregulated, it's really hard to have clear thinking thoughts. If we're in very high overwhelm, as in survival mode, survival energy, we actually don't have access to our prefrontal cortex. So in a very high sympathetic state, for example, we might be agitated, we might be fleeing from things, relationships, work, wanting to change jobs, feeling very emotionally dysregulated, angry. I think I mentioned angry, frustrated. We might feel very emotional, sad, not really understanding why we can't seem to make clear decisions, changing our mind, making plans, canceling, inconsistency. Those types of things can say to us, okay, we're in this high sympathetic. I think of it like the gas pedal on. We're
Yeah.
kind of going Mach 10, which a lot of people think they thrive in. And we do for periods of time, but not a lifetime. So that would be a sympathetic activation, meaning gas pedal is on. The other part of the nervous system, there's sort of three components, is our ventral part of the nervous system. So we have the sympathetic and we have the parasympathetic. Parasympathetic has two branches. There's the ventral part of the nervous system, which is social engaging, resting, digesting, connecting like we are. We are making eye contact. We both feel pretty calm, maybe some excited energy, but nothing that we can't handle. And then we have what's called the dorsal state. Dorsal, there's sort of two states also. The dorsal part of the vagus nerve branches down the brain, the vagus nerve runs down the brain stem, and it innervates at the neck and throat and comes down, our back being dorsal, and lands in the gut. So in a high state of dorsal, high tone dorsal is shut down and freeze,
Mm,
dissociation.
mm.
Low tone is essentially the feelings that we get right before we fall asleep. It's like a conservation state. So there's two. In conserving, when we're sleeping, things slow down, the heart rate slows down, and we're resting, sleeping. We're not socially engaging, right? In order to feel, I should have mentioned this about the ventral. When we're in ventrally dominated state of parasympathetic, we need to feel safe. It's a really important component.
Okay.
And so in high tone dorsal, shut down, freeze, collapse would be like the end point. Don't see that too often or generally. I mean, like true collapse would be someone's essentially in the hospital. So it's a conservation state. It's too much. The impact on the heart, the blood pressure is too much. If we're coming up in this sympathetically dominant state, at some point, we will, if we don't slow down, we're going to have a heart attack. So if the ventral part of the vagus nerve is not toned enough to come in and go, it's okay, we're going to get through this and everything's going to be okay. If we don't have this kind of wave of like activation, deactivation, we're going to be up here, 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 here. At some point, it's going to be too much. The dorsal part is like a brake. It comes on and hammers it down and says, that's too much. We can't cope.
Okay.
And we will, shut everything down. We might go into, like I was saying, more of a dissociation. It might be that we kind of lose a sense of time. It's kind of like that sense of like deer caught in the headlights. And again, this is a bit of a spectrum. For some people, they can dissociate for a moment. It's like, oh yeah, I forgot where I was. For other people, it could be gaps of time that we lose. So there's also physiologically changes that happen in the nervous system. So we brace, we constrict, we hold our breath. Our digestion can be, especially if this is long-term, will be deeply impacted. So the dorsal brake is on, it's essentially like holding on to our digestion, given that that nerve is there. So then it'll affect, the organs in the viscera, essentially. So we know that different types of stress are going to affect the whole body. So then, stress and our hormones are connected. And so the endocrine system can be deeply impacted by stress, particularly when it's ongoing. So this is the difference also between shock and developmental trauma. A shock trauma that somebody goes through like a car accident or something and come out of it essentially healthy, there will be a recovery period. And it's like, whew, okay, I come back to my sort of homeostasis. I come back to baseline. But if we've had a lot of adversity before a car accident, we're not coming back to that baseline. It's like we're trying to find it now. So the effects on the body, the brain and the body, can be much more impactful when we've had, a plethora of ongoing adversity.
I can definitely, like, just as you're talking, listening, I can see that this pattern for me, because there have been many times in my life where I've had these shock traumas piled on top of the ongoing parts of, other
Right.
little things. So even though I'd done so much work on myself and self-care and thought I was so much more regulated, I never actually had I don't like to use this word because, I have to be careful that I don't get into my own broken story, right? But I never really had a baseline of this is like normal nervous system response. It's always been heightened. So I think when things happened last year, it was such a hit to my nervous system. And I find this so fascinating, right? Because you and I have talked about this, how the rate of ADHD seems to be like skyrocketing. I think everybody's talking about ADHD. Everybody's talking about somatic work, seems to be the trend right now. But just in listening to you, it makes me wonder, like, do we have an outbreak of ADHD? Or do we have a bunch of people that are realizing, like, there's more and more stress piling on in our worlds, and our bodies are just saying, like, we've hit max level. Now we're
Mhm.
medicating people,
Yeah.
which is a
Yeah.
whole other conversation. But so now we've got some idea of how it presents in the body. We've got some idea of like what this looks like in terms of sympathetic, parasympathetic. And if I'm understanding you correctly, our body gets into this habitual pattern, right? Because if we run something enough times, our body's like, yeah, this is normal. This is our new normal.
Right.
And I know for me and a lot of my clients that uh, they want more peace in their life, but as they slow down, that actually creates this, like, I call it chaos in their body because it's dysregulating for them to be at peace.
Right.
So how do we move someone who
Mhm.
doesn't have the opportunity to necessarily work with a somatic
Mhm.
practitioner, right? You have your hands on my body. How do we move someone from getting out of these habitual loops where they're caught in their parasympathetic?
Mhm.
How do we move them into or support them in getting to a new baseline where they can actually be connected with their body and start to create some peace and understand what a regulated nervous system looks like? And beyond that, what is possible for people when they do nervous system work? Like, what will change in their life?
Mhm. So maybe I'll touch first on the the first sort of question. So where I would suggest people generally start is having an understanding of where on the nervous system map one is. So if I were to say, those three parts, the sympathetic, the parasympathetic, and those two branches, it's like, where here would you find yourself generally? And so if someone says to me, "Oh, it's really hard for me um, to slow down, right? I'm very athletic. I like high intensity sports. I'm training all the time. My job is super stressful. I love it. My kids are in 14 activities, and my husband and I are tag teaming all the time." It's like, okay, great. So where are the areas in which are challenging? So is it that I don't have time to slow down? Or am I not making the time to slow down because it's really uncomfortable if I'm just to sit and have like quiet time? So that's where I would start looking at what area are you trying to change?
Right. This
So
also requires that people be honest
mm,
for what they're actually feeling, like if
right.
they're not sleeping, if they have
Yeah,
anxiety, if they find
that's
themselves
right.
in overthinking, perfectionism, like
Yeah.
not just taking those as the status quo. Or the way I've heard it talked about, which I thought was fascinating, was the curse of the A-type overachiever. I'm like,
Ah,
it ain't a
yeah.
curse. Like,
No.
you
Mhm.
actually can change that.
Right.
But
But it
we've
becomes
just,
habitual. Mhm.
yeah, like people have just considered, well, this is normal. This is how we
Yeah.
work. And it becomes the identity of the
Yeah.
high achiever, not even seeing it as being problematic.
Right. So, yes. So, I would say if someone is really new and they don't have a lot of self awareness, then it may be okay. Are you running through injuries? Are you like, what is actually happening? So, yes, exactly. Being honest. I do see a lot of people with sort of unexplained chronic pain and then realizing, oh, okay, well, it's because I've been in this functioning freeze and didn't really realize that it's not a good idea, to run with broken toes. I'm just exaggerating, but for
People
that
do
kind of
that.
example, but they do, right?
And then they
Exactly.
give themselves like a pat on the back because look
Yeah.
how tough they
I was
were
the
working
first
through it.
person after breaking my leg to get back to the cycling team or whatever. It's like, okay, well, yeah. So it's looking at what exactly is happening here.
I'm just laughing because it's so my people and it was me, right?
Yeah.
Like it was like the more adversity that I could work through, that
Yeah.
really became my identity. Like
Right.
I kind of got off on look at all the things I can survive, not even recognizing that was the story keeping me trapped and stuck in
Right.
this kind of survival freeze pattern. So
Exactly. So let's say someone knows, okay, I've had kind of like the upbringing that I've described, and they have gut issues, and they've seen people for all sorts of different testing, and there's this unexplainable thing that's happening, and they feel anxious sometimes and aren't sure why. Okay, so we could go in that theme. It's like, okay, so that may affect someone's sleep, it might affect menstruation, it might affect a lot of these different things. So then it's like, okay, so if I am to have an understanding of myself, and I know I'm on that freezing, constricting, bracing, checking out kind of aspect of the nervous system, then I would say, okay, so maybe some things that one could do at home would be to understand the different parts of oneself. So if I'm still having to, work 100 hours a week, do I have to do that? Or am I doing that as a way to avoid the quietness because it's too overwhelming and I don't know how to do that? So then it's like, okay, so then maybe some gentle movement. So let's say it's the athlete. Let's take one day and do some gentle stretching. So we can still move the body. We're not sitting like a lot of times. I think you and I have talked about this before. People are told, well, you just need to meditate. Well, when
Like
somebody's
torture
in,
for
yeah,
somebody who's
exactly. When
active.
someone's in, yeah, active or in the high threshold of sympathetic activation or shut down, it's extremely difficult to go inside. So we want to do it in a way that we're really titrating, meaning step by step, little bite-sized chunks. Maybe it's qigong. Maybe it's yoga and stretching. Maybe it's going outside and having a walk and not listening to a podcast or music, even though this is, we want them to listen to this one, of course,
Yeah.
but just for that time, just to, what is it like to not be distracted with something else? And if it's overwhelming, okay, so it's okay. We don't need to judge it, but maybe we can get curious. So
Yeah.
looking at what are those defensive accommodations? What are you doing as a way to help you to cope, to help you to feel better, to feel more connected? Or are you doing it as a way to disconnect? So wherever someone is kind of on their map, I like mapping it out. What am I learning about myself? And what are my emotions about that? Is there a part of me that feels scared? Is there a part of me that's happy that I'm doing this? Is there a part that's really protective of like, hell no, I'm not doing anything like this. I don't want to learn about myself. This is really scary. And then getting curious about those feelings, those emotions. As we're exploring in the self, what are the sensations that are coming up? What emotions do I feel as I'm doing this? Do I have any images? Are there memories coming back to me? What are my behaviors that I'm trying to change? And then, of course, we have the meaning making, right? Then our brain wants to get really involved and make meaning out of it.
Yeah.
But if we can kind of like, I think I might have said to you, we're going to take the brain, we're going to just put it on the shelf over here, and let's just be with your body, even for 5 minutes, and see how that feels. So this would be one way. It's really about the self-exploration.
Yeah.
What area am I trying to change? What is it I want to learn about myself? And then how can I slowly start to have access to my internal world?
So everything you said there, because for me, as soon as I go up into my head and thinking, I've already lost the game. Even
Mhm.
though I know this, it's such a
Mhm.
protective mechanism for me to go into thinking that I have to, usher myself gently with a lot of compassion and grace back into my body. And what you said there about curiosity, I talk to my clients a lot about that because curiosity and judgment, they can't hang out together. Like you can't be judgmental and curious at the same time. It's really, really hard. So if I'm in my thinking head, I'm going to be in my judging head,
Mhm.
which means there is no curiosity and compassion. And this work, whether it's, with a therapist, with a coach, with a somatic practitioner, you can't make progress if you're not willing to be curious about what's going on for you. It's not work that somebody else can just do for you. There's no magic pill around it. And it's such an invitation into knowing yourself better and knowing and understanding the parts of you that you've never explored before.
Right.
And, when we first started talking about parts, I'm like, oh my God, feel like I'm like multiple personality disorder because we all have so many parts. And when you can, you even talking to me about, well, let's be curious about all these parts being in the room together. And I'm like, are you kidding me? This one part's going to kill the other parts. This might not be a good idea, Melina. But it's been so fascinating to just be able to step outside of myself and witness these different parts and let them each have a voice without judging the part of me that wants to be vengeful or
Right.
judging the part of me that is angry, or judging the part of me that just wants to curl up into a ball and do nothing. Like, they all are offering me something. And if I don't stay with them and present with them, my body isn't going to come out of this nervous system response, because it's like I'm fighting myself. I'm fighting my body all the time. So I love how you say, like, just the smallest things can make such a big impact, like walking without a podcast on to create space and just being present to how uncomfortable does that make you feel. You know, if I can get my people to sit for like 5 minutes, you can do anything for 5 minutes, as opposed to, can you sit in silence for 20? That's torture. But
Right.
5 minutes is good. Or can we start with a guided meditation? Or even, I think I was talking to you about bilateral. I really like bilateral beats because the sound bounces from ear to ear. So it gives my brain something to follow,
Right, right.
but I can
Yeah.
still be in that calm and present state. But even with all of this, you know, part of what is so humbling is that it's not something that can be fixed just quickly, right? These habitual patterns have been with me for so long. So I can't expect, you know, let's say 48 years of ongoing big T, little t traumas to disappear in 12 months of work. So I'm really curious, from your perspective, can people get back to that baseline after running these patterns for so long? Like, is that even a possibility? Am I reaching for like,
Yeah.
I'm reaching for like a bar I'm never going to reach? What does this look like? Like, so how will things be different on the other side?
Mm. So, firstly, there's nothing to fix.
Correct. I like how you always remind me of that. It's like the knowing it, but the part of me that loves to be the learner and loves to understand and dissect things so badly wants to know. And that was, you know, that wanting to be fixed and recognizing that I couldn't fix it was a big turning point in my initial therapy way back in the day. Because if you remember, like, I read the book,
Yeah.
read the things, and then I remember coming in and you being like, are you done reading the books, Lisa? Like, are you, because I came in so crushed after reading Codependent No More by Melody Beattie. I was
Oh,
like, my
yeah.
God, I'm broken. I'm all these things.
Mhm.
Here's the playbook. How do we
Here's the
fix it?
manual. Yeah,
And you
right.
were like, now you can start to do the work,
Mhm.
because this is here, but you're not broken. We just need to unravel these patterns. And it was so hard, because I was like, don't you have a PDF on how I
I
could
know, I
just
just need
like,
to know how to do it, and I'll do it and tick it off, and then
right.
we can go on. Absolutely.
And even still being on your bed, oftentimes I'm like,
Yeah,
is anything changing? What's happening here? Are we there? Are we there
yeah,
yet? And
exactly. Mhm.
the irony is, in order for the work to work, I have to be willing to not be attached to the work working.
Right. Yeah. So I can come back maybe and speak a
Yeah.
little bit more to the idea around what people might feel, what might change,
Hmm.
can we actually get to where we want to go? So yes, yes, and yes. And
Mm.
so what I find generally is, as we move through, it's like the ladder of the nervous system, right? As we kind of drop down maybe from here, and there's nothing wrong with being up here sometimes.
Yeah.
The concern of being here or here is the physical implications on the body. We are just not meant to be, if we were a vehicle, right, with the gas pedal on all the time, or the brake on all the time, or the gas and brake
I
on
was
all
going to
the time.
say the gas
Right.
and
Yeah,
brake. I think that's
that's
me.
right.
Gas and brake at the same
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
And revving the heck out of our system, right?
Yeah.
Over time, our bodies, like a vehicle, if not maintained, will start to not work anymore. Things will start to break down. And that's, the unfortunate thing that I do see is that people living a lifetime of this kind of stress and digestive issues, endocrine system issues, um, joint issues, autoimmune diseases, that sort of thing. So yes, things can change. So I don't really, it's not the words that I would choose about going back to some
Mm.
kind of other baseline,
Yeah, I
because I
guess
don't
there's
even
nothing to
know what
go
that would
back to.
be,
It's kind of
right?
how
Yeah.
what are we
Yeah.
moving towards?
So what we're moving towards essentially is homeostasis, where all things in the body, or I would say coherency. So there's a homeostasis in terms of our physical health, that when things are working optimally, we have homeostasis, which would be like a baseline where our heart's not having to, pump excess blood because we are up here and it's, we're going to have a heart attack. So we have homeostasis. We have coherency. When our emotions are regulated, our nervous system is regulated, our well-being feels like we have this natural ability to be in flow more than not. And again, it's not that we're always going to be regulated. It doesn't mean we're here. It means the resiliency to be able to bounce back from something that happens. How long does it take us? And how long are we in dysregulation? Helps build resiliency. So then it's like, okay, so if I can check in with myself and say, oh, okay, you know what? I've had a really busy week. I think on the weekend, I'm just going to take some time for myself. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to do a little internal self-exploration. We have internal healing intelligence. It's just a lot of us don't know that. And we don't know that we can depend on that. But we have to be, again, self-aware to go, oh, okay, well, I'm feeling really rushed right now. What's happening inside of me? I'm choosing to double book myself on some day. Why am I doing that? Just being self-aware helps us to change the behavior pattern. So then again, if we drop down from here to here, it's like, oh, okay, I feel a bit more at ease. I can feel a bit more relaxed in my body. When I'm with my friends, I'm not thinking about, what I need to do tomorrow, that I can just be here in the moment and enjoy. I'm not rushing my kids everywhere. I'm taking time to check in with how they're doing. I'm spending less time on devices. I'm going to bed at the time that I say I'm going to go to bed, not when I wake up in the morning, kicking myself that, I didn't go to bed earlier.
Yeah.
These types of things help us to feel more, again, regulated, to feel a little bit more like we're supporting ourselves to make better decisions, which will then translate into our own internal feeling states, our felt sense.
Yeah,
And likewise with the freeze response, it's like, okay, I'm in this functioning freeze and I can tell that I'm bracing and holding. How come? When I go to bed at night, what am I thinking about? Can I ask the thinking parts to soften back, give me access to my body so I can feel myself, maybe let go of my muscles that are holding, slow my breath down? Those types of things can be really helpful.
Yeah, it's so fascinating because I would have, before, I think it goes back before 2023 with all the COVID stuff as well. I really would have considered myself pretty well regulated because I had done so much work around it. And I think it's just been so interesting to watch how quickly that got ramped up again because of various things going on in the world. And I think that this is so much of what we're seeing with people, with just things that are happening in the world. They don't even need something like a shock trauma like I had. It just, I don't know, maybe we're going to war now. Like there's just crazy stuff always going on. And, one of the things that I talk to my people about is I think one of the ways that I've been able to navigate this, and I don't want to say better than most because I don't think that's fair to say. However, because of how I sleep and eat and hydrate and move my body, those have given me a pretty solid foundation to stand on to do this work. And I see so many people with massive health problems, like you were saying, right? Because disease is actually dis-ease in the body. And it just makes me so grateful for how I have cared for myself because it, like I said, it's provided a foundation for this work. Whereas I think a lot of people, and I talk about this a lot, are chasing the wrong problems. They're trying to solve the wrong problems. They're trying to solve their gut issues with, all these different health protocols or their chronic headaches with all these type of protocols. And we are living in a society and in a world that creates this disconnect. Like we're literally every single day doing things and living in the world that creates that disconnect from our heads and our bodies. and value so much people being up in their heads and all the doing versus the connection in the body. And that's why I'm here to do this work, because I think it's so important that we find our way back to ourselves. And that's also why I think that I was given this gift, said through gritted teeth. I was given this gift of like deeper healing, because I think that this is more of the message that needs to come through for people to hear. And there's so much talk online, and I know you're not online, about somatic work without people really understanding what that what that means and the
Right.
impact that it can have on them when they look beyond their symptoms. So using the symptoms as an invitation into the work, but then
Mhm.
recognizing that the problem that they're needing to look at is very different than the problem that they think they have.
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah.
Is there anything, like we've been talking, I could talk to you forever because I've always got so many questions for you. Is there anything that we haven't touched on that you think would be really, really important for my listeners to know? And I know we've talked about a lot.
Mhm. I was just going to touch on there in terms of, yes, like the world events and other things that are going on that can really easily distract us from ourselves. And sometimes, fear will do that.
Mhm.
And so I would just suggest that um, although we want to know and keep up with current affairs, that it's also really important to come home to ourselves, to carve out the time to spend really getting to know what's happening individually. Because if we each can become more and more aware of how we are in the world, how our nervous system is reacting, and we start healing individually, that's going to also help heal collectively. So I think that just in light of, all the things that are happening in the world right now, that collective healing is possible. I see it. I see it all the time with clients that, I've been working with for a period of time, and suddenly they'll come in and they're sleeping better, or they've reunited with somebody that they couldn't stand to be around before, or they're just able to change jobs or move or actually get into a relationship where they haven't in the past because they have been in a freeze state and have lived with a lot of fear. And so fear really does often cut us off from having the ability to feel confident, to feel like we can change. And sometimes we can get stuck in believing that, right, having these beliefs that we're not going to change. So why bother? So I would just suggest, as we get to know these various, like fear is another part. So getting to know what we're afraid of and being able to support the fear within us versus judging it or avoiding it can be one step closer to finding the kind of well-being that we want, individually, or even like in community or culturally, collectively.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything really is energy, right? Even with co-regulation, that's us
Yeah,
reading each other's energy, and our energy impacts other people's energy. And for anybody who's like,
exactly.
that's not true, well,
Yeah.
it's actually science.
Yeah.
And everybody's had an experience of being around someone that they're just like, the hair stands up on your arms and
Yeah.
you need to move
Yeah.
away from them, or all, like
Yeah.
we're all picking up on that. And it is so true around fear creates such a disconnect and such a toxic environment. So one of my mentors says, be in this world, but not reminds us that we're not of this world, right? That
Mhm,
we are
mhm.
spiritual, energetic beings. And I think it's so important to know, like, you know, I think that we have a certain level of responsibility to know what's going on in the world. I don't totally agree with like just completely unplugging from everything and living, I can't go that far.
Mhm.
But I also think that there is a line that needs to be drawn around how much are you allowing, how many weeds are you allowing to grow in your garden because of what you're seeing, what you're listening to, whether it's social media, the news, the radio, and really being responsible for that, knowing that it is impacting you on an energetic level. So I even say, like, when you scroll through social media, you may not remember what you saw, but your body remembers how it felt in
Mhm.
witnessing or hearing whatever it is. And those little things may not seem like big, profound, but over time, if more people would stop watching the news, I think the world would just be a happier place.
Yeah, it can really influence how we are, how we respond. how we are more agitated. It creates or can create a sense of helplessness. So again, we're not meant to be inundated at the volume and the speed in which we now get information.
Yeah. And that helplessness can lead into that being in that kind of victim mentality, which then activates the nervous system, right? Because you have to go into that protection mode. So it's this like this really vicious cycle. So we could talk forever because you know I love you and I love
I
your
love you
work, and I'm so
so much.
grateful that you came into my life. Again, I mean, you know, I opened that door. Hey, Melina, you miss me? I'd love to see you. But I'm really so grateful for everything you've taught me about myself and just the things that you've opened me up to. And now that I get to introduce you to, you know, you've worked with my clients now and bring you on the podcast so that more people can really understand this work. So having said that, I know you're local in Vancouver, so, you know, 500 people can't beat down your door to work with you. But is there any place that I can send people to connect more with your work, or um, resources that you want to send them to? We're happy to put them in the show notes for you. I know you're not on social media, that's totally fine. But, you know, is there any place that we can send people to find out more about this or learn more about perhaps finding a somatic practitioner in their area?
Yep. So my website is one place that folks can find me. I'm happy to send information to you, Lisa, that you can put in your show notes, some more
What's the
resources.
actual, what's the URL?
Wow. Yep. MelinaMcConnell.com.
And that's MCONNELL, right?
Two C's, two N
MCC. Okay, so Melina,
L E
MCCONNELL.com.
You got
Okay.
it. Yeah.
Okay. So we'll send
There's some
people
great
over to your
books as
website.
well. I'm happy to share those with you. I can send
What's
you
one great book that they could start with?
Body Keeps the Score.
Oh, that's a great book.
That's where I would suggest people start.
Body Keeps Score. Do you remember the author's name? I can't think of his name off the top of my head.
Basil Vanderkolk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
An eye-opening book.
Yes. Yeah,
Right.
that's the one that I would suggest. There's lots, so I'm happy to share more.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
To you, and yeah.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for all your time, Melina.
Gosh, thank you
You've
so
really
much for
just been
having me.
such a blessing in my life. You know, there's no accidents. And it's just, again, as I was reflecting before I started this interview, like where we started from versus where we are now, how different I was then. Like you've known a version of me that nobody really knows. And I've known a version of you that is so radically different from where you are now. And we are both such a testament to what happens when you do your work on yourself, whatever path you take, coach, therapist, somatic work, like
Yeah.
you can't go wrong if you decide that you want to be committed to your growth, your peace, your well-being. I mean, you cannot make a mistake with this type of work. So
Yeah.
I
Gifts
appreciate
wrapped in
it so
ugly
much.
dressing, right?
Oh
Can
my
really
God.
lead us to profound, life-changing experiences.
Yeah. Yeah. Those moments
Such
have
a
to
pleasure.
happen. Thank you. All
Yeah.
right, I'll wrap this up. Otherwise, I'll keep gushing about you.
Oh,
So
good.
make sure you make
Oh,
sure you
thank
head
you.
over to the show notes. Make sure
Okay.
you check out Melina's site. Go get the Body Keep score. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me. I'll put that in the show notes as well, and I can reach out to Melina and ask questions, or I'm sure you can email her directly through her website because I know that's where I first found you again. It was like an email. Hey, Melina.
Yeah.
Anyway, so thank you so much for coming on, and I will see you in person soon. So much love to you. And thank you for listening. If you love this episode and you believe it will help somebody else, which is pretty much anybody would benefit from listening from this episode, please make sure you share it and tag me on social media so that I can give you some love back and say thank you. So thanks so much, Melina.
Thank you.